Alright, finally finished another Nexon game, and one that I actually enjoyed. I can't possibly see where someone would get mad at something in that video, and yep, never mind. Nature always finds a way. Well, fine, what do I got slotted next to do? Ah, yes, haven't you heard? The highly anticipated game created by a team spawned from a law firm that owns Bethesda dropped its subscription cost, taking another notch out of the belt of that overly defended and rather outdated market model. Brings us down to what, like 4 well-known games with subscription models? Oh, by the way, when I say law firm that owns Bethesda and not by Bethesda, it's because beyond the licensing of their series, Bethesda was not the company that created this game. This is a ZeniMax Online original. All those games journalists that claimed the game was created and now operated by Bethesda because they saw a logo crawl across their screen? Good research there, guys. Bethesda practically gets a publisher in name only credit here. Speaking of which, the only thing that was dropped was the subscription cost, making this game what I've referred to as a buy-to-play game, like Guild Wars 2, The Secret World, and what Defiance used to be. You still need to pay $60 to play the game, so any game journalists calling the game free-to-play are also highly mistaken. Henceforth, this is another special episode, since the game is not, in the purest sense of the word, free. If you had asked the members of Grindstone before playing this game what we'd thought of Elder Scrolls Online, having only our experience based on the beta, or rather glorified press release that it was, or that launch, we would probably have said something completely different to the game that we've just experienced. Hell, take a look at the almost prophetic side quest on this video, and you'll probably tell how sour the attitude of this game was. Yeah, I know I've been setting up the, oh god, I don't really want to do this caustic critic trope, but this is seriously one of the most remarkable turnarounds I've seen any game pull off. I suppose I better start and reveal exactly why that is. The game suffers from some occasional design schizophrenia. This might seem like a running theme in the review, where the game will display great amounts of detail and effort, right beside signs of lazy, rushed work. For example, a lot of building architecture has fantastic amounts of detail, but will be copy-pasted ad nauseum, removing the effectiveness of that initial detail. All inns of the same faction look exactly the same, and have the same layout. All houses will follow this mold as well, as do all manors. It's a real shame, as it undermines some amazing level of detail that was put into each building, and in almost a reversal of other games, all the caves are completely unique. It's a real shame that they felt the need to copy so much of their own work, smashing things into place so that they look terrible, or have parts sticking through other buildings and assets hastily pasted in. The lighting the game uses is a whole other story, and it's absolutely gorgeous in every sense of the word. Rays of sunlight will push through tears in the sails of a spinning windmill, mage lights will give off an eerie glow that changes as it spins around the caster, and fire effects will illuminate dark caves while you fight. The same chaotic design philosophy mentioned before can apply to the animation quality as well, with great details in the various emotes and player characters counteracted by the awkward shuffling of the horses and zombies in particular, and the rather hilarious jumping animation for enemy rogue types. When it counts, the animations are mostly on point, lending brutal impacts to heavy attacks that send enemies crashing into the ground, or characters airborne from a vicious upward slash. The game has great attention to detail as well. If you see a character rummaging through a rucksack, reading a book, or looking over a map like a lost tourist, they're actually checking their inventory, looking at their skills, or looking over the map, respectively. There's a bevy of emotes to discover, allowing you to play musical instruments, stagger around drunk, or fall flat on your face. Just know a few of the dances are a bit on the goofy side, especially if you're a Breton. Might be best to keep the dance of your people behind closed doors. The user interface goes for a minimalist design, choosing to hide away unnecessary information when it's not needed, and only displaying stamina, magicka, and health when those bars are being depleted. This makes the game screen feel very open and allows your focus to stay on the combat, which we'll get to soon enough, though some information is oddly placed in the various corners and can be easily missed. There's also a negative to this mostly hidden UI, as you can easily forget to monitor your own health as you focus on the nuances of the combat and trying to take advantage of an enemy's opening when your health just can't take the hit. As one might expect from the Elder Scrolls series, the soundtrack is fantastic. There's dozens of driving tracks, ambient tracks, all orchestrated and fitting the world that you're in. Series veteran composer Jeremy Soule returns to craft the game's fantastic title theme, building once again upon the Morrowind theme. It's amazing how well he can use one theme to create so many memorable pieces. The rest of the duties go to Brad Derrick, who also does an excellent job of keeping the quality of the tracks up, as they help to add to the ambience of the game rather than distract you from it. In fact, that ambience is staggeringly good. The weather effects get coupled with distant thunderclaps that grow in intensity with a storm. Sometimes the thunderclaps are so loud that they'll actually startle me. The combat sound feels impactful as well, as knocking down an enemy in full armor will be accompanied by the crashing of metal. There's plenty more examples, but the overall sound design feels excellent. Adding to that excellence is the voice acting, which this game boasts as being one of the only fully voice-acted MMOs. At no point will any quest giver be relegated to a silent dialogue box, each reading out their lines in full, and if you read faster than they speak, you can zoom through most of that dialogue if you wish. I've even had plenty of laugh-out-loud moments playing throughout the game and listening to some of the more clever responses and dialogue that occurs throughout the story.
Slavery, border raids, and infighting have them primed for chaos. They just need a little push. I've written myself a part, a small but pivotal role, if you'll excuse me. Hey! You hate each other, remember?
As good as the voice acting tends to be, with plenty of well-known voice actors, or in the case of John Cleese's Caldwell, actors, there's the occasional odd or weak line read or just overall goofy voice. It's not uncommon to run across a Nord laying on a peanut butter level thick Russian accent, and special mention goes to Aleph, a Khajiit from the Fighters Guild who sounds a lot like a fellow internet reviewer's impression of her favorite movie villain. Kept waiting for Aleph to call out for Michelle is all I'm saying. Add to that weird dichotomy of having great things soured by lazy things, a lot of dialogue tends to get repeated, sometimes by different voice actors, to repetitive arrow-in-the-knee effect.
An Argonian savage made this?
Didn't Argonian make this?
An Argonian savage made this? An Argonian savage made this? An Argonian savage made this?
An Argonian savage made this?
Add to that the occasions where a member of your character's own race doesn't recognize them as a member of that race, and you've got normally solid handiwork with sore thumbs sticking out everywhere. This is a really big game. I'm not necessarily talking about the virtual scope of the world, but the download is hefty and the hard drive space is quite massive, totaling nearly 50 gigs of space, so if you have a slower connection, you're gonna be waiting for a while. This download actually inspired me to go out and buy a better modem just so I wouldn't have to waste several days trying to download it. To start with, you're given a choice of race and faction, and note that if you don't have a pack that lets you play any race on any faction, or the Imperial Edition, which gives you the Imperial race that can choose any faction, then your racial choice will be limited by faction. The three factions and their racial choices are as follows: the Aldmeri Dominion, consisting of the Altmer, Bosmer, and Khajiit, the Daggerfall Covenant, who consist of the Breton, the Redguard, and the Orcs, and the Ebonheart Pact, who was made up of Nords, Dunmer, and Argonians. If you want to play in the same faction as Grindstone, then pick the Ebonheart Pact, though you can still join Grindstone as a guild, but more on the guild system and community. Races also directly affect your character creator, which might be echoed with a resounding duh, but know that some races, even human races like the Redguard and Imperials, are locked out of certain skin and hair color choices, and choosing angular faces on some of the beast races can provide some terrifying results. Once you've selected your race and alliance, you'll have a choice of 4 classes, though you really shouldn't feel too holden to those classes, as the game is very free-form. Classes instead will dictate what forms of class abilities and ultimates that you'll receive, locking you out of others rather than limiting your weapon and armor choices. Dragon Knights who wield the power of flames and draconic fury, sorcerers who can summon Daedric allies and wield lightning spells, Templars who are rather versatile in their skill sets, and Nightblades who will act as your general assassins. There's not really a wrong choice here, so if you want to play a roguish sorcerer who uses a bow and stealth while summoning companions to your aid, you can. In fact, your race will have more of a general usage to your intended class rather than your actual class. I would have gotten a lot further into this game if I hadn't deleted my first character upon reaching level 15, just because I got extremely fed up by the fact that Imperials weren't really well suited to making sorcerers, and that I couldn't make an Imperial with red hair. I've got my priorities straight. If you come from other Elder Scrolls games, then you'll find the system rather limiting, but as an MMO, it's generally very open, allowing for unique builds and playstyles regardless of your class choice. You'll also find that skills are easy to earn throughout the game, with some quests rewarding you a skill point just for completing it, earning a skill point on leveling up, or finding 3 sky shards within the world to earn another skill point. When you first start out, you'll be taken to Cold Harbor, a realm of oblivion controlled by the Daedric Prince of Schemes, Moloch Ball, and will be tasked with escaping the prison section of Cold Harbor along with the Prophet. Here you'll be introduced to the mechanics of combat, which feel very satisfying once you get your head around them, especially when pulled off flawlessly in larger fights. Pressing the left mouse button will fire off a quick light attack, while a series of successive clicks will do a combo if your equipped weapon allows it. Holding the left mouse will begin charging a heavy attack that will knock stunned enemies off their feet. Holding down the right mouse button will cause your character to block, which will stun an enemy that's attempting a powerful swing, denoted with yellow sparks radiating from that enemy, costing you only some stamina and a reduced impact to your health. While blocking, you can click the left mouse to bash the enemy, stunning them if they were charging a specialty attack, denoted with red sparks flying out from the enemy, and leaving them vulnerable to a heavy attack of your own. You can also use hotkeys 1 through 5 to use abilities, and R to unleash an ultimate attack, and while this seems very limited, you'll get further options later in the game. This game uses the idea of a dodge mechanic very well, allowing you to dodge based off your amount of stamina rather than limiting it to 1 or 2 uses for major attacks. Hell, if you have enough stamina, feel free to literally dodge roll every attack and follow up with a hit as your enemy misses their swings. Don't feel too worried about dying either, as the penalty for death is rather minor, resulting in a simple hit to your bank account for damaged gear repair, and a walk from the nearest way shrine if you don't possess a filled and appropriate level soul gem. An ally can also use their soul gem, again if it's a proper level, to revive you as well. If you play these games during the beta and launch, this might seem drastically different for you, as there's no choice in equipment, and the zones have been touched up to make them more streamlined and act as a better tutorial. The tutorial itself has also been majorly trimmed down. Once completing the tutorial, you're dumped off in your faction's first major city rather than being dumped in the 2 tutorial levels that it sent you to, but you can head back there at any time. That change is a minor weak spot in the game's storyline, as while Bleak Rock was an apropos but rather boring starting zone for the Ebonheart, it quickly led to Balfoyen, which introduced the concept of consequence and choices, and oh dear god are the moral choices for the Ebonheart pack truly brutal. For a game that we were all dreading even having to install, Elder Scrolls Online is some of the best and most thought-provoking, downright depressing moral choices in a game from recent memory, never mind from an MMO. ZeniMax Online skips the usual Bethesda fare, hell, the usual video game fare, of a very black and white morality, and instead gives you some of the toughest choices one can ever make, especially if you manage to immerse yourself in the story. There can be a bit of hit or miss with dialogue though, especially if you happen to play as an Argonian. NPC dialogue in this regard often forgets that you're a member of the lizard folk, even dipping into, it's an Argonian thing you wouldn't understand, because clearly you, as an Argonian, wouldn't understand Argonians. They thankfully don't have this issue in a few quests where it's absolutely vital to the story, but it happens so much that it'd be a real issue that might want to be resolved. It's a real shame as it undermines the impact of the overall story, and really pulls you out of the experience when so much more effort was clearly put into making each character feel like an actual person, rather than just their job or function as a quest giver. If I had to guess, I think the dialogue was probably set up in a purposeful effort to save money on recording dialogue unique to each race, leading back to that idea of the jumbled design, and it's truly a detriment for Argonian players. If you happen to play a Khajiit, an Orc, or any one of the other non-human-like races, feel free to let us know how they handle your dialogue throughout the story. With the mention of moral choices, we should talk about the questing, which not only did something the Secret World could only manage, but also does something even more unheard of in the MMO space. We actually began to care about the people we were talking with, listening to their stories, their occasionally awful voice acting, enjoying their dry humor or quick wit, or just being interested in what they had to say. The majority of MMOs can't pull this off, often making you want to mash through the dialogue to get through the meaty bits of the quest requirements and completely disregarding any sense of story or pacing. Secondly, and perhaps most importantly, the quests actually have an effect on the world and the game's storyline. If you come across a village being ransacked by angry spirits and eventually come to calm them, it allowed the survivors to escape and begin rebuilding. Then those ghosts will be no longer hostile to you, and you'll find the survivors gathering up their belongings and supplies in the aftermath. If you're sent to distract an enemy general as your army besieges a fort, then you'll have that fort retaken with friendly soldiers corralling the enemy prisoners and giving triage to wounded troops when the day is won. If you convince a city-state of Argonians that living on regardless of constant hardship and pain is preferable to losing themselves, their history and cultural importance to the void, then you'll find them around and they'll come to aid you in your struggles. This is a major deal, and it makes it very clear throughout the game that your choices matter, as that these NPCs and artificial characters feel like real people. It also makes you feel far more important within the game's world, though at the same time the game also works to assure that you're fully aware that you aren't always the be-all end-all of this story. The three alliances could do all of this without you. They use your skill and prowess to help ease their victories, but don't merely leave everything up to you. As briefly mentioned before, rather than having you single-handedly take down an army, you'll instead be given orders to infiltrate or cut a path to the commanding officers, or lead an important NPC to safety, leaving that army in disarray as your allies charge into their ranks and seize onto your extractions. Honestly, it's a rather clever way of handling the idea that you're very important, but also helps to avoid a bit of the issues that come with being the only chosen one in a game with thousands of other only chosen ones. So not only do the quests feel good to play, and have some weight to them, occasionally avoiding the trap of kill X to gather Y, they also leave a lasting impact. It also seems that they may have had their experience rewards boosted from the beta and launch of the game, as a couple of Grindstone members have expressed the speed at which they managed to level within the game. It isn't all that clear if this is because they were indeed buffed, or things have just changed enough to make the playing experience more enjoyable, and thus feel like everything is progressing faster. Speaking of changes, one of the touted features of the modern Elder Scrolls games has finally made its way into the game in the form of the Justice and Champion system. The former brings thievery, fencing, and skills associated with the criminal aspects of the world, while the latter is a revamped system for those players that surpass level 50 cap and push into the veterancy rank system, as to be greeted by the familiar Constellation system first presented in Skyrim, though not as in-depth as in that game. For those of you who are more, shall we say, pragmatically minded, you can now pick locks to enter houses before rifling through their effects and find valuable loot to sell to a fence. You can also find said loot by pickpocketing NPCs. Simply crouch and go into the hidden state before sneaking up behind your target until you're given a prompt to pickpocket, as well as a percentage chance to succeed. Don't be surprised if you fail a 90% success, though, as it seems to be oddly weighted. The harder the target is to steal from, the more points you'll earn for the Ledger Domain skill line, and the better you can make your stealth gameplay, lockpicking, and pickpocketing skills. You can also choose to murder your target and then rummage through their pockets for a better chance at greater loot, though be warned that a murder will obviously push you into a much higher threat level on the justice meter. If you don't want to accidentally attack someone and get an assault charge, be sure to turn Prevent Attacking of Innocents on in the gameplay options, since it's off by default. More than a few Grindstone members, myself included, have received a beatdown from the guards for firing off their spells into random crowd members. If you are caught and choose to pay your fine, or you're killed by a guard, you'll lose all of your stolen items, which are marked with a red hand icon. You can attempt to flee from the guards and make it to safety of the Outlaw Refuge, assuming that the town you're in has one, to sell off your stolen goods, but be warned that the guards have a lot of crowd control and will use it to ruin your day. All in all, this system works rather well, and while the justice mechanic is nowhere near as in-depth or player-to-player based like it is in Age of Wushu, it clearly works well here for an MMO where you can just steal so much. The champion system, on the other hand, is something that every player will experience from the extended playtime in the game. For every 400,000 experience gained while playing the game after level 50, you'll receive 1 point to spend in the champion constellation, which is broken into the 3 archetypes representing rogues, warriors, and mages. These archetypes are further broken down into 3 separate constellations, each for a total of 9, and their own special passives that can help shape your character. Do take note that some of those passives will require massive amounts of points to be spent within the champion system before they become available. For those of you unfamiliar with how the Elder Scrolls level system works, or have only ever played other MMOs, you might find the system a bit weird to wrap your head around at first. While your character has a level is constantly raising as you play the game, and is tied exactly into your racial skill tree, you'll also notice that every other individual tree levels up on its own, granting an experience bonus while you finish the subsection's level. This also means that if you want to get good at using a specific weapon type or skill set, you'll actually need to use that weapon type or slot those skills for an extended period of time to gain proficiency in them, and access to better skills and passives within. You can also get lucky finding randomly placed skill books that will give you a free level of proficiency in that book's skill tree. Within the skill tree are 3 class-specific skills, granting you abilities, ultimates, and passives that only that class can have, while everything else is open for all classes to take at their leisure. Ah yes, this is another game where you can play as an assassin that's known for healing people. Except unlike Arcade, it's your choice, and not something that you have to do in order to become an assassin. There's a huge difference between the two. Once your proficiency is high enough to unlock usable skills, simply drag and drop them into the hotbar provided. While you only have 5 skills and a single ultimate at the start of the game, once you hit level 15 you'll be given a second weapon slot and the ability to hot swap in battle, which also brings up its own hotbar with 5 skills and an ultimate. Note that you can use the same weapon type for both hotbars, changing up your playstyle to fit the situation, but you cannot use the physically same weapon for both, and will need to craft or acquire a second weapon of the same type to do this. Speaking of crafting, it's actually really useful in ESO. We were just as shocked as you, since so many MMOs have crafted items becoming instantly useless, as drops and quest rewards will clearly blow them out of the water. Here it's the exact opposite, as crafted items will always be better than their earned or found counterparts. Exception goes to some late-game set-piece items, but you can also craft your own custom set-piece items, so it's a bit of a wash. For example, a level 10 crafted potion will not only blow the level 10 bought or looted potions out of the water, but even be better than the level 12 and 14 potions as well. Crafting is also pretty straightforward. You increase the amount of components used to make higher level gear, and then switch them out to the next tier of crafting components to make gear of that tier. You also won't need your crafting materials or weapons in your inventory to use them for crafting, instead store them in the bank to free up your bag space. Though, know that completing crafting quests will not count the items that you've made unless you have them in your inventory. It should be noted that banks are accessible across your account, so if you feel like re-rolling your character, simply stash all your items and money in the bank and retrieve them on your next character. Feel free to pick up a crafting profession or 4 as soon as possible. Though, don't be surprised if you're left hunting down the woodworker station in most towns, as they're often segregated from the rest. Makes me wonder if they smell bad or something. Another bit of advice, pick up the 3 NPC guilds, Fighters, Mages, and Undaunted, as soon as possible. Grindstone member Drusker waited to pick these up until later, as it wasn't made entirely clear that you could join all of them without consequence, and it led to some major headaches, especially with the Fighters Guild. There are plans to bring in the Thieves Guild and Dark Brotherhood as well once the justice system has all its kinks worked out, so look forward to that. As you head out into the world, the first thing you might notice is that the world feels immense. It seems that this is another area that ZeniMax Online has gotten right, as while the game isn't an open-world MMORPG, its zones feel huge in scale and offer lots of variety to make the world feel like a much larger place than it actually is. Traversing this expanse can take some time, which can be minorly alleviated with a mount, though they only really become useful when you spend time upgrading the speed and cost over a whopping 10,000 gold for the basic mount. They'll only go up 1% in speed each day you upgrade them, and there are 2 other upgrades that also go to 60. It costs 250 gold per daily upgrade, meaning that if you want a fully upgraded mount with maxed out speed, stamina, and inventory space, you'll end up spending 45,000 gold and have to log in for a total of 6 months. I'm starting to see why this was initially a subscription game. Keep in mind that if you start with the Imperial Edition of the game, you'll already have a mount in your Collectibles tab. Along the way, you'll encounter many different locales, ranging from farms to battlefields, and each designated with its own icons. Farms have a wheat icon, battlefields have crossed swords, area bosses have a skull with crossed swords, towns have a house icon, cities and forts get a tower icon, delves and solo dungeons have a torch icon, and public dungeons have a cave icon. Party dungeons will also have a gateway icon, and Oblivion anchors have a vortex. You can tell when you've cleared out one of these areas when the icon turns from black to white. A bit of an issue with the Oblivion anchors is that they're supposed to act as a dynamic event that players throughout the zone can show up to, in order to push back the melding of Oblivion with Nim for a time, as those anchors are literally trying to pull Nim into Oblivion. The major problems is that these dynamic events are always located in the exact tiny spot, and they don't affect the local wildlife, and are almost certainly inspired by the death rifts from the MMO Rift. All the chains with none of the tentacle hentai. This blatant lifting didn't need to happen, as we've seen what Oblivion evasions look like in past Elder Scroll games, and while the story tries to hand-wave away the idea of the anchors, it would have been far better to have a proper Oblivion gate rip itself from the ground and begin morphing the terrain around it, sending out NPCs to attack, rather than just taking the mechanic that made the game Rift a unique experience and doing it far weaker. The rifts in, Rift would actually expand over time if they weren't dealt with and change the local biome to match the entity type of the rift itself, eventually causing those monsters to attack nearby settlements and towns until they fell and had to be retaken before they could be used again. The same mechanic is what the old Oblivion gates would do, pushing up from the ground, permanently scarring the landscape with literal hellfire and causing the fauna and even rocks of Oblivion to breach in the world of Nim, as well as leaking out an endless supply of Daedra and making them a massive priority to get closed. Here, outside of the implied threat from the story, these anchors seem almost laughable. A technical issue with the game is that it seems to suffer from memory leaks that have yet to be fixed, so be prepared to restart the game every once in a while. The game also has an odd habit of crashing, and while it doesn't happen constantly, it does tend to happen most often when opening the journal, so be prepared for that. All in all, this game is way better than it had any right to be, given its questionable origins and initial failures, but with the game's disarranged design, it's no surprise that there's great elements mixed in with these minor flops. Let's see if this trend continues in our next category. If there is one thing I should get out of the way immediately, it's that this game is an occasionally awful community. I mean, seriously, for your sanity, avoid the zone chat, or even local chats in heavily populated areas. Again, we got some of the most insufferable people you'll likely meet, and while they aren't as bad as the community in Arcade, you can be sure that you'll find plenty of racist and insultingly stupid flame-bait comments all over the place. There are good people here, and even a very vibrant role-playing scene, which honestly has made more than one of our Grindstone members smile and applaud. It's just harder to see through some of the moments of textual refuse going on display. You're likely to meet several people in the game's various dungeons, which can lead to amusing situations where 15 or so players all dogpile on a solo dungeon boss to earn credit for clearing the dungeon. While this does rather jarringly break the sense of immersion within these instances, those additional players can be a real benefit for clearing out some of the harder areas or assisting in doing the aptly named public dungeons. Thankfully, the launch issue of bots farming delve bosses for endless profit seems to be gone. There seems to be a lot of anti-bot measures in place, really. The game is a very similar guild system to the one found in Trove, allowing you to join up to 5-player guilds at once and switching between chat channels by using the G1 to G5 chat commands. It's a rather interesting system that allows a player to join a roleplay guild and yet play in a guild with their casual friends who just want to kick back and enjoy the game. Players from other factions can also join your guild, but of course cannot party up with you. To make your own guild, simply reach level 10, press G, and choose to make your own guild. It's very simple and straightforward. The game also has no traditional auction house. This is where guilds once again come in, as once you receive enough members in a guild, 50 to be precise, you can bid on a guild merchant NPC, located in the various cities and sometimes on major highways throughout the lands, that allow your guild members to sell items to other players. This somewhat functions as an auction house, but only the guild that hires the NPC will be displayed, meaning if a guild doesn't have anything on offer in the category that you're searching for, then you're simply out of luck until you find another guild merchant NPC. This seems to have been done as an anti-bot feature, though it also hinders the ability to tell what an object's true value is, as each guild sets its own prices, and you can easily be overcharged for the most simple of items. The game's PvP system actually feels tense and interesting, with a ton of mechanical depth to help balance out the flaws of the usual large-scale PvP system. Rather than simply focusing on capturing the keeps and objectives, like Warhammer Online or Dark Age of Camelot did long ago, there's several quests inside the war zones that have you looking for supplies to help keep innocent bystanders caught in the conflict safe, or helping to set up barricades and assisting in their escape from the conflict zone. There's plenty of sky shards to locate and caves to explore. There's also quests offered by the generals of each faction that send you deep behind enemy lines, subverting the idea that the only way to play is simply Zerg rushing the resources of a keep and smashing face first into a door, by tasking you with reconning the area, gathering intel for your faction, or hunting down particularly troublesome players. This has an effect of causing areas far from the front lines to see an enemy presence, making each journey throughout the PvP zone feel tense, as if at any moment an enemy assassin could leap from the shadows and cut you down, even in your own friendly territory. Note that while you could normally revive yourself with the soul gem in the PvE section of the game, that ability is lost in PvP, and you'll need either an ally to revive you or respawn at the nearest allied outpost. All in all, ignore the chat channels and realize that it doesn't necessarily reflect the gameplay experience, and you should be alright here. This is a straightforward cash shop, almost entirely cosmetic with a few potion boxes thrown in, and various packs available to choose from. If you bought the game just before the buy-to-play conversion, you'd not only receive 800 crowns for purchasing the game, but 1300 for your subscription, meaning that you could essentially buy the Imperial Upgrade or Adventurers Pack from a standard edition of the game for free. Found that out the hard way, considering that I actually specifically bought the Imperial Edition so that I could play on the Ebonheart Pack, and then found out that I could have gotten the whole damn thing for free. Luckily I used those points on the Adventurers Pack, and that was a lot more useful, because I probably would have had to break someone's kneecaps at that point. The Imperial Upgrade grants you the Imperial Race, the Imperial Horse, the Pledge of Mara, which is like a wedding ceremony combined with an experience booster, and the Mud Crab Pet. The Adventurers Pack grants you a set of treasure maps, the Bantam Guar, and most importantly, the ability to play any race in any faction. A recently added starter pack grants you another horse, the Windhelm Wolfhound Pet, and a limited set of potions that match their effectiveness with your level. Otherwise, you're just looking at some pretty basic stuff here. Potion packs that run for about 200 crowns, repair kits that go for 400, a 10-pack of scaling soul gems that also cost 400. Not a one of these is something I'd suggest spending money on, as the convenience of owning them is minor. There's things like costumes. They're purely cosmetic, and I don't find the current selection all that interesting. Perhaps we'll see a better variety later. Costumes will range from 400 crowns to 1,000. Since mounts are a bit more attainable now, but still rather pricey, getting one here might just be a decent alternative, but since the differences are cosmetic, paying a range as large as 900 to 2,500 seems a bit odd unless you're just looking to collect. Pets are also completely cosmetic, ranging from 400 to 700. Like other games with companion pets, it summons a small creature to follow you around, and that's it. I have to commend ZeniMax for not falling into the trap that so many people thought they would. Besides including packs to lift a few restrictions that, to be fair, were there even when this was a subscription game, nothing in this cash shop feels all that required, and nothing but the initial game is locked behind a paywall. This is how you embrace the buy-to-play model, and once you own it, you're not going to feel painfully restricted from content. Even the subscription option only gives a small boost to gained experience to skills and levels, as well as a bonus of crowns each month. Think of it as a way to support the game further if you're into that. Hell, I'm actually thinking of keeping mine going. I'm liking it far more than the other game I'm subscribed to. Of course, if you watch my show and don't want to get the PC version, you Xbone and PS4 owners will get your chance to play this one on your respective consoles June 9th, amongst yourselves. The big two are still too busy being petulant children to allow fully cross-platform games to exist without an exclusivity deal. Color me surprised. The game I had no intention of enjoying has turned out to be one of my favorite MMOs I've played. Perhaps it helps I didn't have any stake in Elder Scrolls, but for the people who did, like Treskar, they might have come in with expectations that weren't fulfilled by the initial attempts to cater to both the Elder Scrolls and the MMO audiences. Since we were fairly soured on the beta, we didn't expect to enjoy playing this, and ended up being a game that we didn't want to put down. Maybe all it takes is time and understanding. Maybe ZeniMax realized that they weren't going to make a game to please everyone and stuck to making ESO the best game it could be, and took the suggestions of its active players over people wanting something that no one could have. Regardless, this game might just win you over, but be very discerning before forking over your cash. Here's my final rating. One of the most interesting aspects of this game is something that's been tried and touted in MMOs before, but something about it here works. The world seems to evolve as you play. The population of villages change, NPCs' lives, sometimes even entire towns, are affected directly by your decisions. And oh man, some of those decisions you have to make. It's so refreshing to see a game that realizes that morality is not some simple choice of tree-hugging good versus kitten-drowning evil. There were many times when I thought I'd be ready to end a quest in a few seconds, only to spend the next 5 minutes going over various pros and cons of the decision I was being asked to make, as well as reassuring myself that I had made the right decision hours after I'd already chosen. It's frankly amazing. Of course, if your own code of morality is already skewed, you can take advantage of the justice and thievery system, essentially adding a whole new layer of gameplay as you stealth around town, stealing from civilians and avoiding guards. There's a ton to learn and do in this game, and even though it seems that there's a bit of a limit on classes, having skills tied to each weapon type, each guild, each crafting skill, means that there's something you can always focus on improving or striving toward. Since ZeniMax doesn't have a pedigree as a development studio, but a major name to live up to, they at least seem very willing to listen to their audience and improve accordingly. Egos seem to be fully in check for once. The justice system alone has turned the opinion of many players around, and if they're willing to listen and implement players' ideas to create a more interesting world and game experience, then there's nowhere to go but up at this point. There's only two things in the shop I'd consider pretty important if you don't have access to them, and that's the Imperial Edition and the Adventurer's Pack. Being able to play as all races, and even play them on any alliance of your choosing, can make joining up with friends far easier if they're dead set on playing an Argonian while you were hoping to roll up a Breton. However, one might consider that a pretty crap thing to have to pay for when the game already goes for $60. So even if you don't think you'll be bothered by race-locked alliances, if you don't pay something, you won't be playing at all. Otherwise, there's really not much to look at in the Crown Shop right now, and as long as ZeniMax doesn't fall into any easy paywall traps, I can only hope to see good things showing up in here. This is a really weird thing to say, but if you're an Elder Scrolls fan, like either a casual player of Skyrim, Morrowind, or Oblivion, or a serious lorehound of the series, you might not want to play this game, and considering that's the game's target audience, you can understand why I would consider it an odd point to make. Here's the thing, the Skyrim fans didn't want this game because it wouldn't feel like Skyrim. The play of a modern Elder Scrolls game versus this game are different enough to feel alienating and foreign, when most of those fans were just looking for a 4-player Borderlands-style multiplayer version of Skyrim. The MMO elements might feel cheap and restrictive to those fans. In turn, the lorehounds might end up getting driven nuts by a few of these series retcons, and elements that, in this game, won't make sense knowing what takes place later on in the timeline. If that's too distracting for you on either side of the scale, you might want to look further into this before deciding to play. For as much as this game gets right, it hurts all the more when it gets things wrong, and will it ever tear you right back out of the world when you see windows clipping into walls, or lamps being placed far off-center from their intended position? Or you get tripped up and frozen in place by 6-inch high concrete bumps. Maybe glitchy things are a staple of the Elder Scrolls series, but they don't really work in an MMO and should be ironed out rather than dismissed. Finally, having public instances from minor explorable dungeons to the occasional instance of "you're here to save the world, and so are these 6 guys," can feel both relieving and frustrating when you just want to explore, or have to sit around waiting for the boss to respawn because someone beat you to the world-destroying threat already. It ties back to the initial point, but it's really hard to feel immersed in the game, bringing your party into the hidden depths of Shadastula, only to have the boss that you've been building up to a confrontation with get insta-gibbed by the daggers of Pones in Face. If you're not prepared to make your dungeon delving a public affair, you might not be able to find a home in this game. Ah! What? Oh god, what time is it? I gotta get started on the video. Alright, let's just... Wait, what the hell? Color me surprised. The game I had no intention of enjoying has turned out to be one of my favorite MMOs I've played. Oh god, that wasn't a dream? I actually like The Elder Scrolls Online? I did not see that coming. No, this wasn't some sort of early April Fool's episode. I actually like The Elder Scrolls Online. Don't worry, I'm scared too. If you want to face the true horror of Nexonian fanaticism, check out my last episode on Dragon Nest by clicking on the left over there, and see how mad people can get when you tell them you like your game. And if you're interested in my usually much shorter side content, you can click on the right to check out a recap show I occasionally do called Backtrack, where I look at games I've already reviewed to highlight major changes. This one's on the game that doesn't ever stop updating, Warframe. I did that video last month, it's probably already obsolete by now. Be sure to subscribe if you haven't lost all respect for me already, and follow me over on Twitter with @ChaosD1 for my personal rants, and @MMOGrinder if you're only interested in show updates. Is it shout-out time again? Because it feels like I just did this last episode. Once again, Slipstream is still slipping and streaming over on his Twitch channel. Lately he's been messing around in the Skyforge beta, which I wasn't willing to pay to get into, so feel free to check out his recordings and highlights. That link is twitch.tv/slipstreamx14, and of course is in the video description. Michael Foy still urges you to check out Ross Ferries on his website paradiseandfairies.com for reviews of video games, various otakudom, and all sorts of geeky nerdy things them kids are into nowadays. I heard some breast-obsessed asshat MMO reviewers shown up in his reviews of Senran Kagura. The perils of living within driving distance, you know.